Hey, this is Gregory Bloom, and I'm here with author Nina Teicholz, also author of the book The Big Fat Surprise: Why Butter, Meat, and Cheese Belong in a Healthy Diet. Nina, tell us a little bit about yourself and how this book came about.
Well, I'm an investigative journalist, and I've worked for National Public Radio and written for The Economist and The New York Times. But this book came about because I was doing actually a book on trans fats, and I started to interview scientists and realized there was a much bigger story about all dietary fats and how everything that we had learned about them was wrong. And part of that was that I had this little side job reviewing restaurants for a little newspaper that didn't have a budget to pay for my meals, so I had to eat whatever the chef decided to send out for me. And that turned out not to be stir-fry vegetables and chicken breast, which is what I'd been eating because I've been a vegetarian for most of my adult life. But red meat, pate, foie gras, all these things that I had rarely, if ever, eaten, I found them to be earthy, textured, delicious. I lost 10 pounds magically, and my doctor said my cholesterol levels were fine. So that was this mystery. How could all these bad foods supposedly, seemingly work for me so well? And it took me 9 years of investigating to figure out the answer to that question.
Wow. So I read the book, and I was impressed that you took 9 years of your time to do all this research. But I was wondering, how did it take our country 50 years to figure this out?
Well, the story of how we came to believe that saturated fats, the fats in dairy, butter, meat, cheese, eggs, are bad for health, really goes back to the 1950s when one scientist, in the face of a panic in America about the rising tide of heart disease that had come from kind of out of nowhere to be the #1 killer, this scientist, Ansel Keys, proposed that it was saturated fats. And he was this very outsized personality and charismatic, was able to get that idea implanted into the American Heart Association. So our very first anti-saturated fat dietary guidelines were in 1961 by the American Heart Association. It's just that his evidence was weak. The evidence was very weak at the time. In the face of a public health emergency, we used very weak science. And that science never got any better. But the idea became institutionalized, it became a dogma, and then it's just been that little acorn of a dietary recommendation grew into this giant oak tree, and we have not been able to reverse out of it after all these years.
Do you think it's possible to change that trend now and to change the thinking and let people look at the real data now?
You know, I do think things are changing, and that is mainly because there have been, in the last 4 years, growing data to show that the evidence against saturated fats is weak. I mean, particularly there have been 2 important meta-analyses by separate research groups, including scientists from Harvard and Cambridge and the University of California, Berkeley, and both those separate groups have concluded they've looked at all the evidence and said this evidence cannot be said to show that saturated fats cause heart disease. So those are really important studies that have come out. There's also my book that has led to a lot of headlines this year, and I think there's an opening and a questioning of these long-time standing dietary dogmas.
So I have Nina's book here, The Big Fat Surprise: Why Butter, Meat, and Cheese Belong in a Healthy Diet. You can buy this book on Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, and at bookstores. Nina, thank you for your time today, and good luck to you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.